as I think great, and start the recording. It's, as you know, I think you probably know, it's been variable, however. Many cities had a really, really rough 2020 and maybe even rougher 2021. And others, it wasn't quite so bad. And I think they're still trying to folks are still trying to kind of figure out what this is all about. But I hope that some of you were able to attend our webinar back in January, where we heard from the researchers at UC, University of California, Davis, about what some of the trends have been. They aren't great, but we also have heard about that there are things we know work. There are things that work. There are practices that work. There are principles we can stick to. And that's what the point of this particular learning network is to really build off of what is work. It is not completely a problem we can't address. So thank you for coming, and I'll now tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. So the next slide, Melody. So we'll tell you about the network goals. We'll tell you about how these things are generally structured. We'll talk about application requirements. We'll give you some key dates, and then we have some time for question and answers. So next slide, Melody. Thank you. So this gun violence prevention network will be one of our signature, what CF Leads calls issue networks. Some of your colleagues have participated in these in other ways. These are team-based, they are experience-driven, they are iterative, and they are very action-oriented. And I know a number of your community foundations have actually been involved in our equity network. And this is actually the CEOs who participated in our first equity network. But you can see kind of the level of engagement and depth of conversation, I think, that's reflected here. And so this gun violence prevention network will be very similar. And we believe it's really unique in the field to get this level of kind of intimacy, if you will, this level of leadership from foundations coming together and working just with community foundations. And as you all know, community foundations bring some very unique attributes to the work. So next slide, Melody. Next slide. So we have a number of goals for the network. First is really, what are the drivers? What is it that is affecting these incredibly sobering statistics? So that we will talk about and try to ensure that we all have a better understanding of that. Then we will increase our knowledge about proven gun violence prevention practices. And when you talked with the experts, you will see that yes, there are some models, sure, but most importantly, there are some key principles that seem to be consistent across those gun violence prevention models and that have been used in many different places. We will support you to launch or expand your gun violence prevention activities. So really to help you really make progress in this area. Next slide, Melody. And then a couple things we do for all of our learning networks is we really focus on your practice. And CF Leads focuses on the use of 5 external competencies for any of its work. And one is really understanding and commissioning and disseminating local disaggregated data so that you can make good decisions. The second, of course, and extremely important in all issues, but particularly important in this one, is engaging residents to better understand this topic, to better understand what are feasible solutions and what elements of some of these models are kind of most needed for your community. Then, of course, the other competency is working across sectors. We community foundations will never solve this issue on our own. Philanthropy will not solve this on its own. Particularly, this issue is going to have to engage the public sector, which is challenging but important. And therefore, the fourth competency that this learning network will focus on is the importance of influencing policy. Our grants are important, but they are not enough. And it's going to take policy to really help us do better and do better by our communities. And by that, we mean public policy, either regulations or literally new laws or changes in practice in all different kinds of ways. And then finally is the opportunity to marshal public and private financial resources to this work. Again, your grants are important and significant, but so are the grants of perhaps larger private foundations that you work with, either locally or nationally, or again, the public sector applying its own financial resources to any work that you all do. So those we will focus on those competencies throughout our time together. And then finally, for those of you who know us, the critical element of any CF Leads work is building peer connections, because after this particular network is done, you need to be able to have somebody you can call up and really share your concerns or challenges or successes with. And so we work very hard on sort of building some of those informal connections that you can draw on over time. And that's what's quite nice about working in the community foundation field, is we generally don't compete with one another. So we can, as we say, you can steal shamelessly and thank profusely as you move forward. So those are the goals. Now we'll talk a little bit about what the structure is for this work. So this is a year-long network, which, as we said, to build knowledge and apply gun violence prevention practices. We will have 6 community foundations from across the country, and community foundations of all sizes from all parts of the country. We really believe that the diversity of community foundations makes for a much stronger learning network. So we know that small community foundations bring certain assets and larger community foundations bring certain assets or challenges. So we strive very hard to have a really diverse group. The teams are made up of the CEO, so this is important as you go back to your teams, or other senior leader. Our preference would be the CEO, but some other senior leader who has decision-making authority, can make decisions on the spot for your entity, for your organization if necessary. And then we're looking for senior staff and a community partner of 2 or 2. So that's the kind of the extent of the team we are looking for. And when you apply, you'll be asked to list your team members as best you know at that time. Okay, Melody, next slide. You'll be expected to commit to 3 1.5-day meetings. These are slightly less time commitment than some of our other learning networks. But so we will be showing you the dates in a minute, so you'll be expected to commit to being present, your whole team being present for those 1.5 days. And then we will have gun violence prevention content expertise. And then again, for those of you who've been with us, we have very structured peer learning, where we have a process we use that we've used for a decade now, which really allows community foundations to kind of share a challenge and get really thoughtful advice from your peers in the room who are part of this network, who can offer you perspective. And there's nothing like a peer, we just, with the blinding flash of the obvious sometimes, how peers can help you. And they've been in your shoes. And so this is the crowd favorite is the structured peer learning that is part of this. We also have action planning, which is really critical. So that help you to think through where you want to go between one meeting and the next. So structured action planning. Next slide, Melody. So we're in discussion with some possible gun violence prevention experts who will serve as ongoing content partners. And we're really excited about the couple of people we're talking to. They have deep experience in a couple of communities and having really worked on the ground in advancing gun violence prevention. So we'll be able to announce that very soon. They should be able to assist the teams, at every meeting. They will be available not only to kind of share sort of from the podium, if you will, but to work with you all independently as we gather. So next slide, please. One last thing on the structure. Sometimes we are able to bring in technical assistance in a variety of areas, and we'll be examining that as well. But again, this will be content expertise. You will come with a particular challenge that you can discuss with your peers, and we'll do also, action planning every time. So each of these meetings have kind of a rhythm and a structure to them. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Angela, who you heard, is our Vice President for Policy and Programs. And Angela really directs and manages a lot of our issue networks. So while we are not content experts and don't pretend to be, we do have a lot of experience offering this kind of learning network. And we look for content partners that are not sort of sages on the stage or graduate level teachers. These are folks that are going to interact with you and are going to recognize and appreciate your own expertise and the interactive approach to the network. So now I'll send you over to Angela, and she can talk to you about the application requirements.
Thank you. I'm going to go over the steps to prepare and submit your application. I'm going to go over the application questions to which you'll respond at a very high level. And I'm going to talk about the participation commitments, so you have an idea of what this really looks like. To apply, first, we ask that you read the application summary and form carefully and understand the commitments that we would be asking you to make if selected for this gun violence prevention network. As Deborah outlined, you'll form a 4-person team. These are the folks that you will pull together who participate in all 3 network learning meetings. And that should include as Deborah mentioned, the Community Foundation CEO or other senior leader within those 4-person team. After you've filled out the application, you sign it, have your CEO sign it, and email it to us no later than July 12th. Next slide, please, Melody. Thanks. So what does the application look for? It's going to look for, at a high level, I'll just say, it's going to look for responses to questions about your community foundation team, your community foundation organizationally, the project team that you've pulled together for purposes of this learning network, It'll ask you to talk a little bit about how do you come to be interested in the topic of gun violence prevention and any thinking you might have done prior to the joining or seeking to join this network. And then a little bit about your current work in this area. And at the end, we ask a question, if this network is wildly successful, what outcomes will you as a community foundation have accomplished as a result of being in this network? We really want to tailor and customize and really make this work the best that it can work for you. So we ask that desired outcomes that you have in mind at the end of the application. Next slide. In terms of commitments, we want to lift up that community. CF Leads really strives to build a community of practice. So we really are looking for all of this forms of participation so that you get the most out of it along with your colleagues. So we ask that teams make themselves available for a 90-minute interview prior to each of the network learning meetings, that you complete the team homework and be ready to bring that forward at the network learning meetings, and that you really have a full team attendance by those 4 people that you've pulled together at all 3 meetings. Next slide. So now we're going to go over some key dates relative to the application process and the meetings. We've already posted the application and the summary of the Gun Violence Prevention Network. On July 12th, like I mentioned, the applications will be due, and you are asked to follow the instructions outlined in the application. We'll announce the selected teams on August 3rd. And then we ask that folks basically return some participation agreements, kind of talking about what I've already outlined. That happens mid-August. And then the week of the 16th, we will hold those team interviews that I referenced a moment ago. That information really helps to set the tone and the bar that we are striving for from the very first network learning meeting and thereafter. Next slide, Melody. So the meeting dates, we're still in 2021 and emerging from the reopening. And so we will hold the first meeting virtually in late September, accommodating people's different time zones, where we ask folks to block out a 3-hour period during which they'll participate in these dates, late September. Early January of 22, we'll have our first in-person meeting, the 27th and 28th, likely to take place in California, someplace nice and warm, hopefully, and we'll appreciate the warmth then. And then the third meeting takes place in May. For more information, the application and summary is available at the Gun Violence Prevention Network page on our website. And we'll be sure, along with sending you the recording of this webinar, to include links to those materials in our follow-up email. Certainly at any point in this process, if a question comes to you, I am so happy to respond. So please, please, please feel free to send me a quick note asking any question that you may have as you're either preparing or contemplating being involved with this network. And then we really want to express our gratitude to our project funder. This is a project being supported by a health-focused foundation, the California Wellness Foundation, based in California, who has long been a leader on gun violence, issues of gun violence prevention. I don't know if you want to say more about that, Deborah.
Yeah, I think it's really a compliment to community foundations that the California Wellness Foundation is really eager to work with community foundations in partnership on this issue, which of course they consider to be a vital public health issue. So I think I say that just because I think it's a real compliment to the field. to show how well community foundations are really stepping up on some of the key issues. And as I said, they see community foundations as sort of the core civic infrastructure from coast to coast. So now we can take any questions that you might have. Melody, I guess we can take off the slides. So we're here for any questions you might have. Fire away.
Hi, thanks Deborah and Angela for all of the background information and criteria you were able to share. I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to how you might prioritize the applications that you get, wondering how much local conditions, the current level of gun violence in a local community might be taken into account, and how that might be combined with the overall just really like mission and vision of each community foundation.
Kick that off and then ask others if you want to chime in. Really, we're super interested in the community foundation characteristics. It's the level of thinking it has brought to becoming interested and have urgency around the issue, and its willingness to take a community leadership approach, really moving from writing grant checks to making an impact. So those are really the top things that are alluded to in the application questions. Apart from that, I would say it would be probably more a portfolio-wide criterion having to do with geography, like Deborah alluded to. We do strive to have a diversity of region and community foundation size type. That would probably be more of the tiebreak, any particular community characteristics. Deborah, do you have any other thoughts on that?
I think that summarizes it, and I think really, I think we're interested in your approach and your commitment, and recognizing that there are very different circumstances across the country. And so you can't be expected to each be solving this problem yet, or I guess. Other questions?
I have a question. Because of the prevention that we would be working on and such, and because of the impact we do want to have in our communities, is there wiggle room for those who would be on a part of the team? So I think I saw 4, but when you begin to think about, you talked about engaging residents, working across sectors, influencing policy, is there some wiggle room so that we can come back, and do the work together, and it's not as if we're pulling, and we just don't have enough people on our team to help support the work?
By wiggle room, do you mean fewer or more?
More.
We love that. We love that interest and that idea of working across sector and partnership. I think we'll have to look and see is probably the way I would approach it. It comes down to just frankly a resource issue, but really we are so excited for you to even be asking that question, Maya. So I would say, make the case. And we will we'll have to respond in due time. But yeah, look, I'd love to talk to you more about that. But yes, absolutely, in the spirit of the various competencies that and approaches that are so important to success in this area, it's a fair question that you're asking. So hope that helps for the time being.
And you might list your 4 and then say if possible, we'd include these additional others. But yeah, the cross-sector element is critical. Anybody else?
I do have another, unless somebody else wanted to lean in that hasn't already. I'm curious about the interviews that are structured as kind of it sounds like a prep session before the actual full convening. And we had the great opportunity to be a part of the equity cohort previously, and I don't recall that was a formal part of the structure. I just wondered, is that, maybe I just wasn't a part of that, but is that a new element, and what really is what are the goals of those pre-session interviews?
Yeah, so the first one is really a key opportunity for CF leads, and we have been using this process quite consistently through our issue networks and others to unpack and really learn more about what is bringing your community foundation to this, what is the state of its partnerships and its dialogues with other key local partners. This would be probably, Santi, to your point, where we would go deeper into community trends and characteristics and really start to set up both each successive meeting and hopefully offering you content that is very tangible and actionable to help you address those issues. So it's really, really important in terms of meeting content development. And it helps us to understand, the prospective actions that you might be contemplating, so that we can design a really nice series of meetings for you. As the lead up to the first meeting, we try to create what we call an arc of learning to really reflect where we're starting out with meeting 1 in September, and then where we think we're going to stick the landing and really head to some very interesting content in the third meeting to help really move your work forward. So those are the purposes, and we do send you a list of interview questions in advance so that all team members can really participate and share their voice in the process. People find it a helpful process, even to align your teams together.
And just to reiterate, this is about what you need. So this is to help us hear what you want and need and shape each meeting agenda accordingly. Yep.
I have one more question too. I'm sorry. I know we talked about those who would be gun violence prevention would be content experts, but will we also have context experts or someone with that lived experience who has kind of been there as well?
Very interesting. So in the kinds of folks that are practitioners in the gun violence prevention space, I would say there's a little bit of both. Often the experts that are really active in these spaces have come to this work over many, many years of just being a community member and really wanting to solve these problems. So that's thing one. Again, we're in the stages of working this out. But I think you lift up a really good point, which is there some way that we need to be weaving that into the meeting content a little bit more forcefully? So it's a really good point. Do you want to add to that, Deborah?
No, I think that's great. The content experts we are considering have lived experience. So as well as real experience on the ground, helping to move an agenda forward in communities.
Hi, friends. May I also make another point, kind of to add to Maya's question or concern? I also think in terms of location where these content and context experts may live, being from a really big city and then moving to a much smaller city, the situation is very different. So I couldn't even imagine someone coming from like Los Angeles talking about gun violence and us applying those things here, just because it's not the same. So I think there's also something to consider as well. I'm thinking about the way that folks here who are involved in gun violence talk about it, and I'm like, this is not how I would have talked about it where I lived. So I think that also be helpful as well. Thank you.
Francis, would you be comfortable sharing an example of that difference? Is it sort of, this idea of a more public health approach is seen as new, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think here, so I'm from New York City, which is like lots of little pockets of small neighborhoods, right? So everybody has their kind of own communities, but unfortunately, these small communities don't really get much done, unfortunately, just because it's such a big area. So they're not able to either move funds fast enough or provide capacity fast enough to deal with an issue that tends to be citywide. While here in Kalamazoo, there are like 3 organizations who are doing the work and they're getting a lot of work done, you know? It's like 3 folks on a group text really doing some things here, which is fantastic. And I love that. And I love that, like the accessibility between city government, public health officials, organizers, on the ground organizations, all of those people are very well connected and are in regular conversation anyway. While in a place like New York City, they're not. You kind of have to be high profile to be a big fish in a big pond. Here, you can be somebody who was interested and then they'll loop you into the conversation via like email or a Zoom call or a phone call or something.
That is super helpful and really interesting observation, Francis. Sometimes we talk about, I'm not sure I'm a fan of this term, but grass tops and grassroots leaders, and is there a far distance between the two? And I follow what you're saying. In some bigger cities, sometimes that distance can seem a little bit farther. So it's an important point. Thank you. Maya, I wanted to go back to context. I don't know if I fully answered your question. Having honed in specifically on the resident voice and sort of shared decision making is one aspect, but I wondered if there was more to your question as it pertains to context.
Yeah, I think there's one thing for those who, to understand the data, who have been trying to stop it, but it's another thing to talk to those and understand their reason for the violence and that, right? And it may not be that they, even if there were stories or something, videos that we could talk to, I think to put them both together helps, I think, any of us be able to do this work better. Because if we're only getting one point of view of it, of what it looks like, and you're absolutely right, Deborah, they could have that lived experience because they're preventing it on the ground. But it's one thing when you are that 16-year-old with the gun and you're making some choices that are not safe for your community, and maybe you have now then turned your life around or whatever that may look like. So I think that's where I was going. But I'm good, I think, with as long as there's some type of lived experience, maybe we can draw from that as well. Thank you.
That was really well said and really, really crucially important. I think the folks in the public that speak to the value of taking a public health approach to this issue are 100% with you, that this, this idea of applying judgment or what have you, reaching certain perceptions about folk who are tied up with this issue is not actually a public health approach. It's a kind of a do no harm. It's everyone has a stake and everyone can contribute to helping on this issue. So thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, thank you for spending an hour or so with us today, and we're really pleased by your interest in this. And again, watch for an email from us with the webinar and I guess a link to the application. Again, anything else we're going to be providing, Angela?
That's it.
That's it. Okay. Thanks so much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Bye-bye.
Thank you.